So I wanted to share a few thoughts about 9/11. I remember going to work on the morning of September 11th, 2001. And as I got to the courthouse I was working in, people were crowded around a TV saying that there was a terrible accident, that a plane had run into one of the towers in New York. I had a feeling this was not an accident. Shortly after I got into the room, the second plane hit the second tower. We knew this was bad. No one did anything the rest of the day. A crazy person came into court and started shouting about how those guys got what they deserved, and we called the police on him. I thought he was disturbed enough to go do something about all this, that he would somehow want to participate in the events of the day. He ended up just being a kind of a cranky guy, but they didn't do anything about him. We were in shock for a while here in Chicago. People who aren't old enough to remember the day, the whole country was worried that there were going to be more attacks. Airplanes were grounded across the country. The only flight we saw in Chicago, this is Chicago, massive airports, thousands of flights in and out on a daily basis, and the only flight we saw for probably 3 days was a life flight, which was taking blood to New York for the survivors. Two friends of ours, two family friends, well, one was my brother, but one is a firefighter, Virginia Rowan, took her recreational vehicle to New York. She was the only hot shower within a quarter mile of Ground Zero. And she stayed for, I believe, 2 weeks. My brother Jim threw on his Army uniform and drove straight through to New York City. This was before security was set up, and anyone who volunteered could just walk onto Ground Zero and help. They started losing people in the piles of debris. They would fall through the piles of debris, and they would only by chance find them. So at that point, the people in charge of the recovery efforts closed down the entire area to anyone who was not with a specific organization. So although he was with the Army, he wasn't attached to a specific unit that was detailed there. So he left. First of all, he didn't want to be an obstruction to the people who were doing the work. And second, he didn't want to fall and disappear down into a hole somewhere. So people who were with a unit that had a designated command structure, they could do head counts and find people if they were lost. Everyone was accounted for when you came, when you left, all of that. He was not with one of those. He was with a sort of group of people who were sort of orphans. A woman who worked in Manhattan was there. A couple of firefighters from other cities who were there. Some civilians who just happened to be there. People who knew the area and the resources who were there to kind of share their knowledge, but didn't really have expertise in excavating disaster sites. Those sorts of people were sort of around him. They didn't really feel comfortable or safe after it became known that people were disappearing in the junk pile. So he left and drove back to his home in Arizona. That's my brother Jim, Lieutenant Commander James Olofsson. I'm sorry, Lieutenant Colonel James Olofsson, U.S. Army. I have another brother, Lieutenant Commander, retired Don Olofsson from the Navy. I get their ranks confused sometimes. We have recently, this year in 2018, heard a report, probably 2 weeks ago, of several men, as many as 15 at this point, who have been reported with breast cancer. That's an unusually high number given the small number of people who were there at Ground Zero. It's a real concern. People risked their lives to go and try and recover bodies. This is a big event in United States history. People who are too young to remember it should make a point of learning about it, because it impacted so greatly our foreign policy and our standing in the world, and our defensive policy, defensive posture around the world. It was the Pearl Harbor of our generation. And I really just wanted to share that with people so that younger people would understand where older people are coming from, because we lived through it. If you've not been through it, it's something that you read about in history books maybe, but it doesn't have the emotional impact. These are real people risking their real lives to try and dig survivors out of the wreckage. Powerful moments, times of great uncertainty. Some selfless people put themselves in harm's way to help people they had no idea who they were. It's worth remembering. It may not live in infamy, but the date is worth remembering. Thank you.